Hello folks, I hope you're having just a great day today. Today I want to share with you a recent book I finally finished, Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. So we're going to be doing my review of it today. I started it when I was in high school, when I was reading more for, not as much for education, but just kind of for escape. I read the first part. It's a 600-page novel. I read the first part, which was about 95 pages through it. And not a lot happens in the first part. So I put down the book. Literally the only thing that's going to happen in the first in the first 95 pages of a novel is going to be that this guy, who's Mr. Smith, who comes from Mars, is going to be escapes from his cell in the last chapter, and that's it. He's arrived and he's escaped. And that's it. And I didn't know at the time. That's basically Robert Heinlein. He has a lot more talking in his books than he has action in his books. That was also my main issue with Starship Troopers, is that Starship Troopers, which I've already reviewed for you, has more talking than it does doing. And it's in military science fiction, which is the most action-heavy, genre out there. There's not a lot of action. It's a lot more talky stuff than there is action and action scenes. Anyway, so I want to review for you Stranger in a Strange Land, which I just finished last week. Now, it's a Hugo winning novel. It's a classic of science fiction, so I want to go ahead and talk with you and unpack it with you for you. Robert Heinlein, and I shared this when I did Starship Troopers, did a few books in a row that all won Hugo Awards and are all very, very weird. And as because of how different they are. The first of those is Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers is like the conservative, pro-military, the current stuff that's happening. That was 59, won a Hugo Award. Sort of became the I called it in my review of it, the Lord of the Rings of military science fiction, because it was not the first military science fiction by any stretch of the imagination, or the 1984, nor was 1984 the first dystopian novel, but both of those really super influenced them. And that one it's super conservative. It's a pay-on to conservative values, to conservative stuff, and so forth. And regularly we'll have, when Robert Heinlein writes a work, he'll regularly push back against the norms. In this case, he's pushing back against some of the more liberal and liberalism norms of his day by pushing a lot of these conservative values. It's a very conservative book. And then 2 years later, he wrote this book, which we'll be reviewing for you today, which is the book for the modern, liberal, free love, free sex, hippie culture that was beginning in the 60s, and was just felt like a love letter to hippies everywhere, and feels like it wasn't even written by the same person, even though it was only written 2 years apart. And then this one, which came a few years later, which also won him a Hugo. And this is a libertarian work. It's super libertarian. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And has a lot of libertarian ideas and feels like a pay-on to libertarians. So within just a few small years, he has a book which is a love letter to conservatives, a book which is a love letter to liberals, and a book which is a love letter to libertarians within just a few years. And all three of them have won Hugo Awards, too. So that's kind of weird, right? It's a weird thing. But let's take a look at Stranger in a Strange Land briefly for you, and then I'll give you my review of it as a novel. If you haven't read it, there's probably very little that I'm going to be able to do here that's going to say, hey, you should read it. It is 600 pages long, and I already talked about the fact that Robert Heinlein, my first attempt when I was in high school, I put it down after 95 pages because it was very, very little was happening. It was a little more talky and a little less dewy. But now that I'm an adult and I read for education, I finished this 600-page his magnum opus, in 2 days. That's how fast I read it. And those were not weekend days; those were weekdays. But anyway, so it took me probably about 14 hours to read, and I knocked out about 7 hours a day after work. And then I went to bed, and then I knocked out the next day, and then I knocked out the next half, and I was done. So anyway, that's Stranger in a Strange Land for you, and Anyway, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the synopsis. In it, what's going to happen, and I'll keep the synopsis brief because I don't want to spend too much, because you either read it or it's a long synopsis, and I'm not going to take you 300 pages into it because of how long it is. But basically what's going to happen is that in the early days of Mars colonization, the first Mars colony is going to be sent in basically the first couple of chapters. They're going to arrive on scene. There's going to be this sort of unborn, unwed child, a bastard child is going to be born of them, who's going to be your main character, your main point of view character. He's going to be abandoned after the colony dies out a couple of years after they started. He's going to be adopted by local Martians and be raised in Martian culture. And he's going to think of himself as a Martian, even though he has a human sort of genetic capabilities. And he's going to show some various Martian powers throughout the course of the book that are psychic in nature, like telepathy. And then he can... then when the next, there's a World War III that happens between the first mission and the second mission, which causes a delay. The next mission heads up to Mars. They find him now as an adult and they bring him back home. And there's this welcoming ceremony and that sort of thing where he comes back home and he is being kept in a hospital away from women because he never met a woman while he's on Mars. They didn't have sexes in the Martian race. Similarly, that he didn't have, he's been raised in it, so he needs to be reacculturated into modern parlance. And you're going to find out that the Martians actually sent him back. Their old ones sent him back to Earth so he could find out what was happening on Earth, find out more about it with this new race and that sort of thing. So you're going to find out more and more about Mars through this person and find out more about our own world through this person too. And this person is going to become very much a cult-like figure during his day. He's going to found he's going to find a religion based on Martian beliefs and that sort of thing. He's going to be attacked. He's going to be because he's a Martian and they want to bring him in or kill him off, that sort of thing. Different countries are trying to bring him in. So he's going to be, as well as the country from which he escapes. So there's going to be a lot of that sort of tension that's going to be throughout the book. He's going to be in a number of different places throughout the 600 pages, and you're going to track many different years of his life during his time on Earth, during the 600 pages, and what he's doing on Earth. And where he's at with his personal growth too. So you're going to follow along how he's influencing the world and that sort of thing. So there's the synopsis of the story. Now again, let's do my review of it. I do think it has pacing issues. 600 pages feels like it's 200 pages too long. It really feels like it should be more like a 400-page novel rather than a 600-page novel. Again, Robert Heinlein's, and I mentioned this before, this definitely feels like a love letter to hippies and so forth. Starship Troopers feels like it would have been popular with the parents of hippies, and this feels like it would have been popular with hippies. Free love is a key core concept, although you don't get to it till later on in the book. But this idea of free love, not of love for enjoyment rather than love for procreation is also a common theme too that you're seeing in there, which was big with the flower child generation. And it was actually written before hippies became a thing. So it's not being written by somebody who's cogent of the hippie movement. But this was something that was embraced very early on by flower children, by hippies, by people who self-identified as something. And I think the key concepts, reasons why, is because of just how they identified with this person who was from outside with Mr. Smith, who was from outside of the normal cultures of our society, and then kind of seeing that society from outside of that. I think they identified with this outsider, with this stranger in a strange land. And by the way, that comes from a quote from the Pentateuch from the Old Testament, which talks about you were a stranger in a strange land when you were in Egypt. It's in Exodus. It's in the first couple of chapters of Exodus. And so it's talking about the Hebrew cultures, and the Hebrews were a stranger in a strange land. So it's actually a biblical title. As a general rule, I've talked about this before when I've reviewed works, but as a general rule, when you try to use a biblical title, you are aiming for a bigger sort of epic narrative and that sort of a thing. Sometimes you'll succeed, sometimes you won't. Earth Abides is a great example of a book that took its title from Ecclesiastes. And I think that Stranger in a Strange Land hits that sort of big giant epic. I don't think it's paced well, but I do think it hits that sort of an idea. And again, I think a lot of people that were there, it was heavily influential in that generation, from people that lived it and read it and really sort of identified with it. It's also influenced our culture in a number of ways. There are a number of words that came from this. The idea of a waterbed is in this too, before it was patented. And you also have a number of words, ideas. There was a church that was founded that was just like the churches in this book, for those people that were really enjoying the Martian religion as it's described in this sort of story. You'll also have a number of grok is another word that's constantly used in this, which literally means to drink, but also can mean to consume, to know, to know something so deeply that you become a part of it, to observe something so deeply that you become a part of it, to love something, also to hate in some cases too, because you have to love it, you have to know it in order to hate it. And so anyway, that's also become a key. It's now in the Oxford, the OED. So it's become. So there are a number of ways that this book has been heavily influential on modern culture too. So there you are. There's Stranger in a Strange Land. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Have you read it? What did you think about it? Did you agree or disagree with anything in my review of it? Feel encouraged to go ahead and talk to me about it more. Whether you agreed with my thoughts about it being too long, not enough stuff happening, that sort of thing. Were you like me when I was in high school, or did you start it and not finish it? I'm happy to talk with you or engage you about that more in the comments below. If you like this video, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. There's going to be so many more of these classics to follow in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And then finally, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and watching my video, because we all have so many things happening in our lives, and the fact that you spent this time with me is very humbling. So I really do appreciate that. Thanks again, and have a good one.